Live stream server's been locking up tonight. Let's try it again. This is FrameSync pre-roll 4. Sunday night, May 22nd, 2016.
Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this Sunday night, May 22nd, 2016 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story tonight, we didn't get our teleprompter on the screen. Now we got it. Okay, now I can tell you about our opening story. We had to go to the archive to dig out some video of a volcano. So I went to May 13 for some video we didn't show you on May 13, so this will be the first time for some of you to see this volcanic eruption. Very dramatic footage in this video that's rolling now. I'll pull it full screen, and I'll tell you about this, what happened, this video, why it looks the way it does. First of all, this is the Turrialba Volcano erupting that was captured with an infrared camera. A single explosion ejected a cloud on May 13. It ejected a cloud of volcanic ash, gas, and rocks from the volcano, which is located 30 miles east of the capital, San Jose. I need to tell you this video was provided by Dr. Ricio M. Mora of Red Seismologica Nacional, and the video was provided to us speeded up. We didn't speed it up here. It came that way. I think they call that, some of you know that already, that term I'm trying to think of. It's called fast motion. I can't think of the term right now, but let's some of you know, maybe I'll think of it before we go off. In today's news, now for May 22nd, in China, 4 cars have been swallowed up by a sinkhole. That's right. Firefighters used a crane to retrieve 4 cars after they fell into a sinkhole in Rujin City in Jiangxi Province, East China. This happened yesterday. One man described how he watched his car fall in the hole as he had lunch nearby. Nobody was hurt, and the reason for the subsidence is being investigated. Oh, and there are subtitles on the screen. He says, then I called the police and firefighters arrived after a while. And for those of you listening by podcast, the video is showing a car being raised out by a crane. Now, a team of men, looks like a tug-of-war, pulling a car with a cable of some kind out of the hole. Another crane view of one car, and then another car being pulled out of the hole, like we said, by a crane. All right, let's update you next on the EgyptAir situation. Authorities recover debris as further details emerge. More details are emerging of what was happening on board the EgyptAir passenger jet in the moments before it plunged into the Mediterranean Sea. French aviation officials have confirmed onboard sensors detected smoke in several areas of the plane shortly before it disappeared. But the cause of the crash, as you'll hear in this video, is still not known.
The remains of the Egyptian flight are being picked from the sea, laid out on the deck of a nearby ship. A blanket, a pillow, foam that was once part of someone's seat. There are seatbelts and other debris, clearly carrying the EgyptAir logo. Here, someone's handbag and a solitary shoe. On one side, a life vest, clearly unused. None of the 66 on board stood a chance. Yet the biggest clue so far wasn't from the sea. It's come through the air. Automatic computer messages sent back to base. Simple words, but they paint the picture of a catastrophic fire on board. Although we can't be sure, this appears to be how the fire unfolded. Everything's happening near the cockpit. At 12:26, a warning goes off that one of the front windows is overheating. Then smoke is detected. First in the toilet, we believe it's the front one here. Then in this bay, right underneath the pilots. It's a critical area full of electronic equipment. A minute after that, there's another warning. A second window is too hot. We think it's this one. And finally, a number of computer systems collapse. Everything happens over the space of a few minutes. One of the world's leading experts on plane fires told me that's puzzling.
The timeline that we're seeing so far indicates somewhere around 7 minutes, which is a very long time if there's an explosive device, particularly a large one. But if there's a fire on board, it's not a long enough time. So it's too short for one and too long for the other.
The fire that downed this plane could have been a malicious attack, but most plane fires are caused by faulty wiring or the air conditioning. And there's another possibility. Laptops, phones, cameras, they all contain powerful lithium batteries, and there have been concerns for some time that they could cause a fire.
It's got a water-activated switch here, so it turns on when it goes into the water.
It's critical that they find the black boxes. Each has a locator beacon, like this. They send out a signal for around a month.
If the seabed has rocks on it or is very mountainous, then you can blank the signals from the sonar. It's just not as easy because you get targets back on the image that look identical to aircraft wreckage.
With the answers still beneath the sea, it could be weeks, even months, before we know what caused this crash. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, Richard Westcott. And friends, some of the video you saw toward the beginning of this news clip was some that the Egyptian military released of the first images of debris recovered from the sea, and you heard the full report with Richard Westcott there. Now, from our archive, I've pulled some video regarding an Egyptian airliner situation that occurred, some of you may remember this, at the end of March, just a little more than a month ago. And I'm going to play that for you. This video will show the Egyptian Civil Aviation Minister Sharif Fathi, and you'll hear her say there are. Now remember, this is not the current EgyptAir MS-804 aircraft or the current situation. This, although it's semi-current, this goes back to March 29, a little more than a month ago, and this was. I'll give you the airline flight number in a moment. It's not MS-804, which is the current plane that just crashed and they're looking for in the Mediterranean Sea. But more than a month ago, again on March 29, the aviation minister Sharif Fathi was saying that there were still 7 people on board a hijacked Egyptian plane which was diverted to Cyprus. That was EgyptAir flight number MS-181 from Alexandria to Cairo. It was taken over after a passenger claimed to be wearing a suicide belt. Here's that video from our archive again for news on March 29, just a little more than a month ago, about another Egyptian aircraft, again, that was hijacked. Here's that video.
There were 55 passengers from various nationalities, including Egyptian who boarded the plane from Alexandria to Cairo, and others were going further. At 7:05, we have started to deal with the situation in the form of managing a crisis through the crisis center present at this aviation center by people from various, and we have to follow the situation. We can say the following. At 7:50, the plane landed at Larnaca airport, and then various negotiations started with the hijacker. According to our information, and our information is from reliable sources, he didn't have a weapon or anything. He said that he had a suicide belt.
All right, friends, I just wanted to remind you with that archive video from not last month, not April, but at the end of March, there was another news situation involving an Egyptian aircraft, and the one that was hijacked with the guy claiming he had a suicide belt on. Okay. Now, something else involving... let's go on to this story. From today's news. Now we're back to today's news. Afghan Taliban leader Mullah Akhtar Mansour has probably been killed in a U.S. airstrike. He and another male combatant were targeted as they rode in a vehicle in a remote area of Pakistan close to the Afghan border, the officials said. The Pentagon has confirmed it targeted Mansour in strikes, but said it was still assessing the results. Christy Johansson reports.
Mullah Akhtar Mansour took place in a remote area near the Afghan border, just inside Pakistani territory. The strike, carried out by drones, targeted a vehicle carrying the Taliban leader and another passenger. The attack is said to have been authorised by President Obama. It is potentially a significant blow to a group which the Pentagon says has become resurgent recently. In a statement, the Pentagon spokesman Peter Cook said Mansour had been actively involved in planning attacks that resulted in the death of tens of thousands of Afghan civilians and security forces. He is also accused of being an obstacle to peace by preventing Taliban leaders from taking part in talks with the Afghan government that could lead to an end to the conflict. But a former US ambassador to NATO says Mansour's death probably won't change very much.
It's not going to be a game changer in the insurgency or in the fight against the Taliban. The real game changer here, in my view, is the decline in the level of US and NATO forces over the past few years. They're sufficient to keep the government from falling, but they're not sufficient to make a strategic difference in the country.
Mansour has been the Taliban leader since July last year, after the group confirmed the death of their founder, Mullah Mohammed Omar, in 2013. Kirsty Johansson, BBC News.
All right, thank you. And friends, Austrian voters are going to the polls, or have gone to the polls, for electing a new president there. Voting is underway in Austria, which could become the first EU country to elect a far-right politician as president. Last month, Norbert Hofer from the Freedom Party won the first round of voting for the mainly ceremonial post. Bethany Bell has the details from Vienna.
Austria has a stark choice when it votes for a new president today. There's the former Green politician Alexander van der Bellen, or there's this man, the favourite, Norbert Hofer of the far-right Freedom Party. Norbert Hofer caused political turmoil in Austria when he won the first round of the presidential election in April. For the first time since the Second World War, the traditional parties of the centre-left and centre-right were knocked out of the race. Support for the Freedom Party has risen because of deep frustration with the established parties, and more recently, because of fears about the migrant crisis.
Unser Land nicht schätzen.
All those people who don't appreciate our country, those who are for Islamic State and war, or who rape women. I tell these people, this is not your homeland. You can't remain in Austria.
Ihr könnt nicht in Österreich bleiben.
The president is a largely ceremonial figure, but European leaders will be watching the result closely. Right-wing parties are gaining strength in a number of EU countries. Opponents of the far right are rallying around Alexander van der Bellen, but polls suggest Norbert Hofer is the front-runner. Bethany Bell, BBC News, Vienna.
All right, thank you, Bethany. And we have an update on this from Jenny Hill. The voting underway now has not yet given Hofer a decisive victory over his opponent, or decisive lead over his opponent. His opponent being, as you heard, Alexander van der Bellen. Here's the report, the update from Jenny Hill in Vienna.
The stage was set for a victory speech, but the next Austrian president is yet to take his place. The country's torn between two men, one from the left and one from the right. Norbert Hofer has plans for this country. His Freedom Party is populist, anti-EU and anti-migrant.
Unser Land nicht schätzen.
All those people who don't appreciate our country, those who are for Islamic State and war, or who rape women. I tell these people, this is not your homeland. You can't remain in Austria.
The Austrian presidency is a largely ceremonial role, but Mr. Hofer would be able to call an early general election. If he did, his party would gain real political power. And he told me today he was still confident of victory.
No, we are 50-50. Half of the people voted for me and the other half for Mr. van der Bellen. So we have to try to connect the people in Austria.
Turnout's high. So is disillusionment with Austria's mainstream political parties. Voters rejected their candidates weeks ago.
I don't like the right-wing politics of Austria, but I consider them to be not a threat to democracy.
I'm worried. And I think that's why people go and vote now, because they are worried, because the old system didn't work.
What's happening in Austria is happening all over Europe. The right wing's gaining ground in countries like France, Germany, Hungary, Denmark. A clash between nationalism and the federalism of the EU.
You really get the sense here tonight that the eyes of the world are on Austria, and that's because the man right back there represents not just the rise of the far right within Europe, but he's also exposed once again the conflicts at the heart of the EU that threaten to tear it apart.
Tonight, support from his own, but Mr. Hofer may not have convinced the rest of this country. Victory hangs in the balance, but he has achieved this, to demonstrate and agitate the fault lines running through Europe. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Vienna.
All right, thank you, Jenny Hill. The migrant situation has certainly caused a grave split. You know, it's 50-50 between those two candidates in their country. It reminds me of a Bible scripture that says a house divided will cannot stand. A house divided will fall. And the anti-EU posture of some, because of the EU welcoming in, Germany welcoming in the migrants, almost unmeasured, and the problems that's caused even for Germany. But it looks like things are beginning to come to a head in a very certain way that will cause the EU to just could shape very quickly in a way that the Bible talks about, where you'll have 5 leaders from the east and 5 leaders from the west who won't get along with one another, but some crisis it will cause them to elect one among them or outside them with the assistance of the Vatican and its representative, the Pope, who will crown the one they select as the new emperor of the revived Holy Roman Empire. He'll be what the Bible calls the seventh and final king of 7 kings. That's mentioned in Revelation 17, verse 10, where it says there are 7 kings. Now, this was a prophecy that God revealed in a dream to the Apostle John on the Isle of Patmos way back in 90 A.D., almost a couple of thousand years ago. And it was for our day today, because when God revealed to John, who he had write it down in a book, the book of Revelation, the verse 10 of Revelation 17 says, there are 7 kings. And then he goes on to say, 5 of those 7 kings are fallen. Now, at the time that John wrote that, none of the 7 kings had even been born yet. It would be centuries before any of them were born. But he says 5 of those 7 are fallen. He's speaking in a future perfect tense, but more or less a present perfect tense, as if it had already happened. 5 are fallen. It'd be kind of like maybe a past perfect tense. I forget my grammar rules exactly, but it's when you're talking of something in the future as if it's already happened. But even more than that, because we're now talking about 5 are fallen, he's saying it's already happened in past tense, but it hasn't even happened in present tense yet. And it's something for the future. So you grammarians out there figure out the proper perfect tense of all that. But here's John in 90 A.D. saying there are 7 kings. Well, there's 7 kings to come at that point in time. And then moving forward, to a certain point in time, which would be shortly after 1814, that would fulfill the next part of that prophecy that John spoke, where he said 5 are fallen. Because the 5 that are fallen, well, let's take a look at that. Let's pull out and then go over my shoulder here into those 5 kings that you can see at the top of this chart. Let's see. Let me get to the top of it. Here's the top part. We'll go to the top part like this. All right. Now this shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. We're just going to mention the first 5 of them to begin with. There are 7 kings. We don't know who the 7th one is. He hasn't come on the scene yet. 5 are fallen. The 5 who are fallen began with Justinian in 554 A.D. So when John wrote this prophecy back in 90 A.D., it would be almost 500 years before the man who would be the first of those 7 kings was even born. That was Justinian. And in 554, he restored the imperial empire, and he acknowledged the Pope as supreme. And he had an alliance with the Vatican. And following him, the second of those 7 kings, as you see in this portrait or painting here of the Pope placing the crown on the head of Charlemagne, Charlemagne being the second of those 7 kings, of those 5 that are fallen. Let's focus on the 5 that are fallen. He's the second of the 5 that are fallen. And then the third of those 5 that are fallen was, let's see, who do we have here? We had Charlemagne, and then the next one, third one is Otto. This is Otto the Great. And then the fourth of those 5 kings that are fallen was Charles V. He was the 4th of the 5 kings that are fallen. And then the 5th of the 5 kings that are fallen was Napoleon. And his falling, his losing of the Battle of 1814 caused the continuous 1,260-year reign of the Holy Roman Empire to be ended. wasn't a permanent ending, though. Even Napoleon himself tried the following year in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo to do a comeback, but he failed at his comeback, so it was a miserable comeback failure, but he really lost the empire the year before in the Battle of 1814 that he lost, and that ended, again, the 1,260-year continuous reign of 5 kings of the 7. And so we have, with Napoleon's loss in 1814, we have 5 that are fallen as of 1814. Now, a century goes by, and a little more than 100 years later, Mussolini makes a concord with the Vatican, and he invades Ethiopia and conquers it, and then makes the pronouncement that he is now Il Duce. He is the new Roman Caesar. He has revived the Holy Roman Empire. That wasn't any kind of a major revival, but he did revive it. He had the concordant with the Pope. He made the announcement. Newspapers picked it up, didn't print it front page because it wasn't a magnanimous revival, but it was a revival nonetheless. And God's end-time servant at the time, who was broadcasting coast to coast in the United States and in Mexico and Canada, announced it coast to coast that Mussolini had revived the Holy Roman Empire, making him the 6th of those 7 kings. And the next part, after it says 5 are fallen, verse 10 of Revelation 17 says, and one is. And this face you're seeing on the screen right now was that one is from 1936 to 1945. So that prophecy written by the Apostle John on the Isle of Patmos in 90 A.D. had different time orders to it. The part that says, and one is, had the time order of from 1936 A.D. to 1945 A.D. Now, how is that, friends, for how the Bible is written? Because, that tells you something. That tells you that there are parts of the Bible, especially Revelation, that are written for the end times only, that are written for us today, you and me today, and can only be understood by events relative to today. And we're seeing many of those play out right before us, as God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong saw between 1936 and 1945. Mr. Armstrong was born in the late 1800s, 1892 he was born. And so by the time he was, how would that put him in 1934? You had about 8 years to 34. You get, didn't I say to 36? Add it to 1936, because that 1936 is when Mussolini made the pronouncement after he invaded Ethiopia that he had revived the Holy Roman Empire. So from 1936, 36 plus 8 for the last 8 years of the previous century, that would make Mr. Armstrong to have been about 44 years old when the 6th head of the Holy Roman Empire came out of the pit, or came alive, revived the Holy Roman Empire for a short space of about 8.5 years. Now, Napoleon reigned for about 9.5 years, so Mussolini's length of reign was about the same as Napoleon's, Napoleon was the 5th king of the 5 kings that reigned for a period of 1,260 years continuous. Now, Mussolini's reign ended in 1945 when, if we zoom in back on Mussolini here, and just below that we see him hanging upside down from the canopy of an Esso gasoline station after they shot him in the belly, and his comrades and mistress along with him were killed, and they all were hung upside down again from a canopy of an Esso gasoline station in Italy. That was on April 28, 1945. And so in April 1945, that put the Roman Empire back into the abyss, awaiting its next king, the seventh and final king, which, let's see, if we zoom out to these slides and go into the one here with the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. That's the crown that like in the portrait, you saw where the Pope was crowning Charlemagne. That's the crown that they passed from king to king. That crown is now on display in the royal treasury in Vienna, Austria. Our last story, we were just talking about Vienna, Austria, and them electing a new president for Austria. Well, they are in the city of Vienna, in the royal treasury, they are the keepers of the guard of the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. It's behind a thick glass cage. You can still go over there, visit the royal treasury, and see that with your own eyeballs. Now, there's plenty of guards in that royal treasury. You will not. And that crown is behind a glass, very thick glass cage. I was able to push my camera up firmly against that glass, hold it very steady as I took a 2-second time exposure, a 1-second time exposure, a whole bunch of different exposures, because they had a big sign that said you can't use flash to take pictures in that room. And, I went out and complained, hey, you can't really get a good picture without flash. And they said, well, you can't take any pictures. We'll confiscate your camera. And I thought, well, why didn't they just say no pictures allowed instead of, you cannot use flash? But that was their way of saying you can't take a picture. Well, I didn't realize that when I took my time exposures, but believe you me, I didn't volunteer any information to that guard after he said, if you take pictures in here, we'll confiscate your camera. I just zipped my lips shut and got out of there with my pictures of this crown. And as you can see it here in the center of this slide, that's the gawky, jeweled crown of the Holy Roman Empire. Once that crown is worn by that seventh and final head, that will revive the Holy Roman Empire for its last and final time. That will commence the opening of the fifth seal of Revelation, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as the Great Tribulation, calling it a time of trouble so great that no trouble since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever after, shall be as great as what's going to happen in this great tribulation. Mega trouble were the Greek words for that. It translate in English to great tribulation. And basically 7 things will happen. That crown will be worn by the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire. He will, in concord with the Vatican and the Pope as the beast and the false prophet, they will require everyone to work on the Sabbath. They won't allow anybody to preach anything contrary to that, so that effectively becomes a famine, the ultimate famine of the world. You've got to actually work on the Sabbath, and if you refuse, well, they'll just simply kill you. You will become a martyr. Only the 2 witnesses will be able to give testimony of God's law and some kind of word as a warning to the world, a testimony. And the world's going to hate them for it. And anybody else, they can breathe fire out of their mouths and destroy their enemies and protect themselves for almost 3.5 years, just 3.5 days short of 3.5 years when they get killed on the streets of Jerusalem, and the world celebrates their death. Everybody else, though, who refuses to work on the Sabbath or refuses to bow down to the image of the beast, in other words, everybody who refuses to take the mark of the beast, because those two things are the elements of taking the mark of the beast, working on the Sabbath and bowing down to the image of the beast. And if you refuse to do that, they will kill you. It'll be the greatest time, the largest time of martyrdom of God's saints. It'll look like any previous martyrdom of God's saints, look like a mere bump in the road, to use some modern-day vernacular that's roaming from the White House to the throne room of the Queen of England. It'll make the previous martyrdom look like just a bump in the road. All right, but another thing that'll happen, it'll be the commencement of round 3 of World War, beginning with bombs blowing up all of the cities of the United Kingdom. over in Europe first, and then Canada and the United States, either the same day, or we here in America, they'll hit us the following day. You know, things happen in Europe time-wise on a globe that spins with time beginning in Europe first, and then that same time happening here later. So we'll probably get it the next day, but could be the same day, that the prophecy God gave through Ezekiel in chapter 6, verse 6, Ezekiel 6:6, where God said, "If you don't repent, my people, then all of your cities will be laid waste." That could only happen in our modern times today, since 1955, since the invention of the hydrogen bomb, for which the atom bomb is only the trigger, and that was a prophecy. That makes that a prophecy for our day, just like the 10th verse of Revelation 17:10 is largely a prophecy for our day. The last part of that prophecy in Revelation 10, after it says, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. Now the 1 is no more. He's fallen too. So now you could read between the lines and say, okay, 6 are fallen, but the next thing has not happened yet, where that verse goes on and says, and 1 is yet to come. And that 1 that's yet to come is going to wear this crown you see pictured here in this slide. He's going to wear that crown as the 7th and final king of the Holy Roman Empire, the king who restores that empire for its last time, as he does that as the beast in concord with the Vatican's representative, whom the Bible will call the false prophet, or it already calls him the false prophet. He just hasn't shown himself fully yet, because his time for performing that role is only in the preparatory stage at the moment. But the other 2 things of the 7 that I said would happen, including 1, this crown being worn by the 7th and final king once he's coronated into office, crowned into office. It'll be a famine of God's word. The 2 witnesses testify. It'll be the greatest martyrdom of God's saints ever. It'll be the commencement of round 3 of World War. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 more things to make the 7 things that are portrayed in our slide here that happened during the Great Tribulation. Is the 6th of those 7 things is the Philadelphia church, the Philadelphia era Church of God, who does what Christ said in Luke 21, verse 36, where Christ instructed us to watch and pray always, so that you may be accounted worthy to escape what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? Well, we're talking about that right now. The next thing to happen is this 5th seal. It hasn't opened to happen yet. It's just the preparation for it is being well laid like a foundation. But those who, during the laying of that foundation, are doing what Christ said in Luke 21:36, watching the events of the first 4 seals, which are progressively active now. They began back in the time of Christ with the first seal, false religion, many coming in Christ's name, saying he is indeed the Christ, and yet deceiving many, and that being progressive, so that it happens with greater intensity, and the other things with greater frequency, like war, more war than ever now, and rumors of war, and yet they cry out, peace, peace, and there is no peace. And the 3rd seal being famine, and the 4th seal being largely pestilence. A little more now. We'll talk in more detail about that another time. But those things are progressive and becoming more frequent, more intense, which Christ warned us. He said, when you see them blossom, you know the kingdom of God is near. And that kingdom of God gets en route with this 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, running 2.5 years, followed by the day of the Lord running a year, with its being the 7th seal and its 7 trumpets and its 7 last plagues. But the 7th thing in of these 7 events that happened during the Great Tribulation is those who were not being Philadelphian about watching and praying, but who were studying and keeping God's law basically, and thinking and knowing a lot, maybe knowing a lot more than some of the Philadelphians because of their because of the diligent study that some did, but then they weren't acting on their diligent study except to shoot off their big mouths and how much they know and how rah-rah they are. And all of a sudden they find themselves left behind as the Laodicean era commences with the greatest martyrdom of God's saints ever to hit history. And Christ says to those who are left, "You are part of my church. Just you were lukewarm about your actions. You knew a lot, and you're mentally kind of committed to it. Now, if you endure the fiery trial you're going to have to go through to prove yourselves now, you can enter the kingdom. But the fiery trial will be martyrdom, very fiery trial. Many will be burned at the stake. That's the way they'll probably do a lot of it again. Or maybe they'll just throw you down on a guillotine, drop the block, chop off your head. Either way, kind of gruesome. They may torture you first if you're left behind. But you still have an opportunity as of this moment to get on your knees and say, God, help me do what you said do in Luke 21:36, so that I can receive the promise you hold out there. Help me watch and pray always, so that you will write my name down in a book where you say I'm accounted worthy to escape, and you gather me up on the two wings of a great eagle at the time you do that, however exactly that symbolic expression is meant, is played out. And you can escape it. I will tell you more details about that another time, but there are some who will not escape it. They'll be left behind, and yet they will be able to still be in the first resurrection, because if they endure to the end through the fiery trial of martyrdom, and Christ will come knock on their door at that time, say, look, I did it, and if you endure like I did, I cried to my Father and said, God, is there a way this cup can escape from me? But it wasn't. I went through it. He sent an angel to comfort me, and I'm here to comfort you. Just endure to the end, and you'll be at that marriage supper with me. So there's an encouraging message to those who get left behind. But listen, I'm saying to you right now, friends, let me come on out of here now, because I've given you all 7 of those things. There's encouragement. I hope you'll welcome encouragement now that you can escape having to face a martyrdom if you watch every day and pray always. All right, let's go through the rest of today's stories. They're the one we just finished it on, the presidential election in Austria, the country that has the royal treasury in Vienna, where the crown of the Holy Roman Empire awaits the next and final king of a restored and revived Holy Roman Empire for its 7th and last time by a 7th king whom the Bible calls the Beast, who will work in consort with the Pope, the final Pope, whom the Bible calls the false prophet, who will put that crown of the Holy Roman Empire upon the head of the Beast. All right, that summarizes it pretty well for you. Let's go on to something more related about presidential elections. I usually try to stay away from politics unless something is just absolutely news, and this is. One of the presidential candidates was in London last week. I didn't play it last week because, like I said, we try to avoid politic-type things. But this has turned into something extremely newsworthy, where, speaking on Good Morning America, I'm sorry, they have a Good Morning Britain, and one of the presidential candidates was in London, and so Good Morning Britain had him on their program. Okay, and you're seeing the host. That's the host of Good Morning Britain. He had as his guest last Monday Donald Trump, who was speaking about the new London mayor. Now, and Trump was in London. Now, London just last week or week before, we just played the news story for you last week or week before, elected a new mayor who is a Muslim. And that Muslim just spoke out and said some pretty nasty things about one of the presidential candidates of the United States presidential race. And that presidential candidate was the one on this program, Donald Trump, who challenged the New London mayor to an IQ test after that new mayor, Sadiq Khan, made the statement saying Trump is ignorant. Mr. Khan reacted to Mr. Trump's latest comments saying his views on Islam were ignorant. And here is how Mr. Trump responded to that on this Good Morning Britain program.
We have a new mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. He's the first Muslim mayor.
Congratulations.
He's been quite critical of you, as you know. He's attacked you for being ignorant. He says that if you're president, you'll make both our countries...
Let's do an IQ test. Ignorance.
He says you will make both our countries less safe. He says, I hope Donald Trump loses the election. My message to Donald Trump and his team is your views of Islam are ignorant.
All right. Well, when he won, I wished him well. Now, I don't care about him. I mean, it doesn't make any difference to me about him. Let's see how he does. I mean, let's see if he's a good mayor.
Are you offended by what he says?
Yeah, I am, because he doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements. They're very nasty statements.
Mr. Trump is at it again. You seem to be making quite a stir with the man who could be next president. What do you make of his latest comments?
Well, it was Donald Trump that began this. It was Donald Trump that said his blanket ban on Muslims would have an exception for me, the Mayor of London. And the point I made with respect to Donald Trump is there's nothing exceptional about me. What about my friends and family? What about other Londoners who are business people, men and women, who happen to be Muslim, want to do business in America? What about other Londoners who want to go and study in America, who happen to be Muslim? What about other Londoners who want to go on holiday in America, who want to go and visit Disneyland and happen to be Muslim? There's nothing exceptional about me, and my views are quite simple. I'm afraid Donald Trump and his advisors, your views on Islam are ignorant. We've shown in London that there's nothing incompatible with being a mainstream Muslim and Western liberal values, and we showed that comprehensively on May the 5th.
All right, friends, we're going a little bit longer tonight. This is the Sunday night program. You know, we're not on Friday night or Saturday night, so we have a few more days than normal to cover than just the one day's news, so we're trying to scan it and cover the last 3 days for you. I want to let you know what's been happening in the way of landslides and flooding caused by days of torrential rain that hit many parts of Sri Lanka, with dozens being killed and hundreds of thousands displaced from their homes. In the capital, Colombo, the BBC's Azam Amim joined a Navy rescue team and spoke to the country's finance minister, Ravi Karunalayake.
Apart from the major landslide in Sinkhole district, there are at least 200,000 people affected by the heavy floodings in Colombo district. And so far, people have been evicted from their houses, but still there are many who live in their houses in order to save their house belongings. And we have joined a Navy boat who are planning to rescue at least 4 people who have informed them that they can't stay there anymore because the water level is increasing. At least we can see a lot of vehicles which are submerged to the water, and including, the houses are, water is there at least until the roof. So it's a very serious situation at this moment, and people have been evacuated, but still there are people who live in the camps, still people who live in their houses in order to save their belongings, despite assurance by the government that they will protect using the military. I'm with Sri Lankan Finance Minister Ravi Karunalayake, who's touring the most affected areas. Minister, what's going on?
Well, you could see that it is, at the moment, it's roughly about 250,000 people in Colombo district that is affected, and entire countrywide it's about 575,000. At this moment, we have toured areas which were very badly affected, such as Sinkhole and the rest of Colombo district, and all I could basically say is that it's a very pathetic situation, and I hope that the things will come back to normal order before too long.
Is the water decreasing?
Well, it is decreasing at a very slow pace, and we are making all contingencies to ensure that the waters are taken out as soon as possible. But still, monsoons are setting in, so it makes a bad situation worse.
All All right, friends, there in the way of tragedies, there have been several volcanoes, and if I can do this without crashing our video player, yeah, good, it worked. I'm going right back to the beginning video where I pulled this from the archive with a volcanic picture because I don't have any video or pictures for the next stories. Well, actually, I did have one. I've got this picture from Indonesia. Let's see. You can see in the background in this picture, you can see a volcano in the background. And this is the volcano in Indonesia that relates to this first of several volcano eruption stories I'm going to tell you about. Now, this one, the one in Indonesia, yeah, this is from today. 7 people were killed as Mount Sinabung erupted. This is a volcano in western Indonesia. It blasted clouds of volcanic ash 2 miles into the sky, about 3 kilometers into the sky. The victims were farming in an area that was declared unsafe because of its close proximity to Mount Sinabung. The volcano was still spewing ash today, hampering rescue operations, hampering the rescue operations. More than a dozen people were killed when it erupted in 2014. It also erupted in 2010 after having been dormant for, listen to this, having been dormant for 400 years. Now, friends, does that tell you something that related to, the fourth seal, which is primarily described by Jesus Christ in plain language as the fourth seal in, let's take a look at this for a second. Let's take a look at our chart. The first 4 seals in Revelation are depicted by 4 colored horses. The fourth horse is described in Revelation or depicted as a pale horse with a rider upon it whose name is Death, and alongside whom rides Hades, or hell, the grave. Now, that's all Revelation reveals about that horse. It's a pale green horse with a rider named Death upon it. Now, Jesus Christ, as he's describing in order the seals in plain language, after he describes the third seal of famine, scarcity of food, as limas, then he describes the fourth seal as loimas. He also attributes to that time sequence between the third and fifth seal, that just leaves the fourth seal, seismic activity, seismos, I think you'd say it in Greek. And then in Mark 13 verse 8, related to this time between the third and fifth seal, Christ said there will be what's the word he used? Tarike in Greek, meaning trouble. Now, he didn't say mega trouble. He's not, he was still describing events before the fifth seal that lead up to the mega trouble. But we'd have pestilence, disease epidemics, plagues of Egypt. We'd have seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, flooding, tsunamis, wildfires, etc. And then we would have trouble, roiling waters, mobs, seditions. All of that relates to the fourth seal. And so that's why a lot of the stories related to those things are those we play you on the news, giving you things that you can take to bed with you, or I should say take to your knees with you, praying before you go to bed, before you get too sleepy, to fulfill what Christ instructed us to do in Luke 21:36. Watch and pray. Watch the events that relate to these 4 seals and pray about them. And then watch yourself be accounted worthy to escape when the angel or whatever comes and tells you we're going, and hope you'll be ready to go, because that message could come sooner than later. It could come a lot sooner than some of us realize. All of a sudden, the words we've heard Mr. Herbert Armstrong, God's end-time apostle Herbert, speaking, will boom, be in our face. You know, he expected them to happen sooner than they have, but the way events are going right now, if he were alive, he'd really be shouting, saying, "Brethren, wake up!" So, you know, those who've been called to watch this and understand this for that reason would be well advised to, as he said, "Wake up!" You know, I can't do it like he does it. He did it like just with a lot of care and concern. He knew a lot of us. He loved us. He cared about us. He wanted us to escape it, be able to escape it if we would just do what Christ said do in Luke 21:36. But with that little introduction, you know that this story relates to the fourth seal because of that description Christ gave in plain language and written up in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You know, where he said it covered seismos and seismos, if you look it up in a good Greek English lexicon or even your Strong's Greek English lexicon, you can see it includes seismos, seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds, and commotions on the ground, not just earthquakes. Read the definition. It's commotions on the ground that includes seismic commotions on the ground, which is what a volcano will do. And this one is in Indonesia, and there's a couple more, but just to finish the story from Indonesia here for you, rescue teams are still scouring the area today, looking for more victims who may have been killed or badly burned. But as I said, they're having a hard time because that thing's still spewing. But they're looking for victims who may have been killed or badly burned by the hot gas and ash clouds released in the eruption. And of course, if anybody's still alive and badly burned, they want to get aid to them. All right, now another volcano, Mount Etna in Sicily. Let me put that. I don't have a picture for that one, so let's put this archive video of just a volcano erupting by an infrared picture, which makes it kind of dramatic. Let's put that up while I tell you about the Europe's highest active volcano erupting yesterday. This is from yesterday's news. Mount Etna. That's not the one in the picture. It's just a volcano erupting there. But Mount Etna, Europe's highest active volcano, rumbled at daybreak yesterday on the southern Italian island of Sicily. The eruption was filmed by local journalist Turi Kagagi, and we're in the process of securing that video. Friends, hope to have that for you by tomorrow night. Also, news from yesterday related to a volcano, several of them. Boom, boom, boom. Yesterday, a volcano erupted in central Costa Rica, belching smoke and ash up to 9,840 feet, or about 3,000 meters into the air. People in the capital, San Jose, about 30 miles west of the Turrialba Volcano, said layers of ash had coated buildings and cars, and there was a fierce smell of sulfur. Friends, tomorrow night, I hope to show you some video from Turkey showing how Turkey is divided as the ruling party anoints a new leader. Turkey's ruling AK party is meeting to anoint a new party leader who will also become prime minister after Ahmet Davutoglu stepped down following long-rumored tensions with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But we're going to close it right here. That's it for this Sunday night edition of Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise, friends. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Monday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy. Until next time, your host for Nightcast, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying thanks for joining me, friends. So long, and good night.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.